welcome to the Cinema ATL podcast. The Cinema ATL podcast is a weekly podcast that examines the world of entertainment through the lens of local Atlanta filmmakers. That would be us, your hosts. I'm Michael D. Friedman, and that is
Martin Kelly.
And in this week's episode, we're taking a look at the new Amazon Prime Video release and sequel to the classic 80s film, Coming to America. But first, Martin, why don't you tell our listeners how they can help us out?
Well, you can help us out by commenting and rating and sharing it wherever you listen to this podcast, and subscribe there as well. So that's Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, more, including Google Podcasts, and also you can watch us on YouTube.
You can watch our waveform on YouTube.
Yeah, but that's exciting sometimes.
I don't get paid enough to do video production, so we're audio only. But you can listen to it on YouTube. But yes, we also want to hear from you. You can tweet us at CinemaATL or my personal account, which is at Badger33.
Or you can hit me up at Marte_real1.
And don't forget about our Instagram, which is at CinemaATL Podcast. And right now, you can go vote in our Movie Madness tournament. We've actually entered round 2. We're deciding on the best sports movie of all time, bracket style, and you get to vote. Just check out Instagram. You can vote in our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And March Madness is coming to a head because the first round was kind of vicious to some movies, but it's going pretty well, and it's fun. It's fun, so definitely check it out.
The Sandlot, number 14 seed, unseeded number 3 Ali. So that was the biggest upset of the first round. So.
You know, I could have thought that may be the one because there's a lot of love for the Sandlot in the world. So.
There's a lot of nostalgia factor for those types of movies.
Exactly.
But anyway, I think we should get into this. Oh, we forgot to mention, you can also check us out at cinemaatl.com.
That's right, the classic.
The OG website. But yeah, so that's about it for the intro. Let's talk about Coming to America.
Yeah, so Coming to America is our big movie review of the week, and it was a big movie. According to streaming statistics, it actually hit a record for streaming debuts. So it is indeed a big movie review. So let's talk a little bit about it. This is a movie about Prince Akeem, played by Eddie Murphy, who assumes the throne of Zamunda as the king and discovers that he has a son back in America. And he must bring that son back to Zamunda to ensure he's got a male heir in order to fend off a threat from a rival nation led by General Izzy. And this is, of course, a sequel to the comedy classic, in most people's minds, of Coming to America back in 1988, which was a classic Eddie Murphy film made at the height of his powers. So certainly much anticipated. And this was also shot in Atlanta. So we talked about this quite a ways back in our movie news segment when this was in production. So
and it's been delayed, so we talked about it a long time ago, and we kept talking about it and kept talking about it, so it's finally here.
Definitely, yeah. And it was directed by Craig Brewer, famous for Hustle and Flow, among others, and also the remake of Footloose. So he's no stranger to remaking 80s films. Written by Kenya Barris, who's one of the creators of Blackish, among others, and David Sheffield and Barry Blaustein, and they are both writers of several Eddie Murphy hits, including The Nutty Professor 1 and 2.
Right. And hear the disappointment in my voice. Right.
You sound like the Office Space guy. Yeah.
the Eddie Murphy movies I enjoy are not The Nutty Professor or those types of films personally. But
right. Well, I'm just saying these writers have a history with Eddie Murphy. Right. So and then a cinematographer, relative newcomer to features, he actually has been a cinematographer, Jody Williams on Empire, actually, among others, television shows. So, obviously getting first big crack, I guess, at feature films, because this is quite a big feature. The cast includes the aforementioned Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, Wesley Snipes, which I think I'm going to talk about quite a bit in this. Leslie Jones from Saturday Night Live, Tracy Morgan, also from Saturday Night Live, among others, including 30 Rock, Jermaine Fowler, James Earl Jones, Shari Headley, Kiki Lane, Paul Bates from the original, and then a cameo by Morgan Freeman, and also Vanessa Bell Calloway. So I guess the big question is, I am very familiar with the original Coming to America, and I've seen it many times, even in recent past. And Mike, I understand you hadn't seen it in quite a while. So I think
Right.
your eyes are the freshest in terms of kind of judging the sequel.
So yeah, so don't get on my case because I have seen Coming to America, but it was a really long time ago, so I don't really remember a lot about it. Um, Pretty much just the main plot of it and some of the the more quotable stuff. But watching this one, I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was it was cute. It wasn't laugh out loud funny. There was a lot of chuckle moments that I had in it. But I did kind of wish it was more the fish out of water type film that the first one was. I
Wow,
thought
yes.
that was a lot that was missing in this one, and it was otherwise it was pretty straightforward. Minor comedy, if you ask me. Like it was enjoyable enough, but it was really at the end of the day kind of more of a throwaway novelty. I actually didn't think that Eddie Murphy, being the the main character from the first movie, was really the main character in this movie. I didn't really feel like he was. I felt like Jermaine Fowler's character was more of the main character in this film. So
Yeah.
I felt a little lacking on the Eddie Murphy side of things.
Well, and I think that's kind of a warning. If you haven't seen it yet and you're a huge fan of the original, don't expect. First of all, nobody really could expect this, rising to the level of Coming to America, because I mean, Coming to America is such a great film for its day, and also it holds up. I actually watched it again after I watched the sequel,
Mhm.
and just realized, unfortunately for my review of this film, unfortunately, I realized how amazing the original is, and
Right.
so much better. And you mentioned it; it's part of my notes actually. Is the fish out of water aspect is lost in this film? That is a huge part of the first film, and that's
Right.
what made that first film work so well. I'll say this: I ended up watching this film twice because my first reaction was really negative. So I didn't want to come in and like just go crazy and just sort of attack the film for being horrible, which was kind of almost my reaction to the first watch of it. And I chuckled a couple times, but I realized what I was chuckling at, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, was the fan service. You know what I mean? And so that's that's
Right.
not a good sign for a film. But when I watched it the second time, I did appreciate it a little bit more. It's not a bad movie at all. It's just not anywhere close to holding a candle to the original, which ultimately makes it a disappointment for somebody like me. Whereas
Right.
a newcomer or someone who hadn't seen it in quite a while probably wouldn't have that same reaction.
Yeah. So like I thought about like watching the original again before I watched this, and then I watched it, and then I thought about watching the original again after watching it before this podcast, so I'd have some more reference. But then I thought, no, I'm gonna like take an eye as somebody who's coming into it pretty fresh because, like I
Hmm.
said, I don't remember that much from the original film, and so I think from that point of view, the movie itself is fine. It's enjoyable enough, and if you don't have anything to compare it to, it doesn't really you don't get that disappointment that you might have. And so, um, I mean, I'm not coming into it totally fresh. So yes, so some of the
Right,
stuff
right.
did disappoint me. Like I said, like the fish out of the water element. I really thought they would. I really thought, based on the title, that he would come back to America and most of it would take place in America again. But
Right,
that's
right.
really just the first act.
Hmm.
Is him
Hmm.
finding out that he has a son and then bringing him back with him to Zamunda.
Right, right. No, no, I agree. And again, I could talk a lot of negative about it, but what I want to do now is sort of talk about some of the positive
Right.
pieces. And so one of my favorite things was Wesley Snipes' addition to the cast.
I
Wesley
totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. He's so
Wesley
good. That's
Snipes
so
was
funny.
amazing. He was so good.
And
Just
his guy, his second in command, or whoever it was
yes,
that
no,
would
that's Michael
introduce him.
Blackston. Yes,
He
Michael
was
Blackston. He's
he was
hilarious.
hilarious
Hmm.
too. That whole bit, and I wish they would have done more with that. That would have been so good.
I totally would have.
But go
Yeah,
ahead.
I totally would have loved to see more of Wesley Snipes. Maybe more of him and Eddie Murphy, because part of the letdown is for me not enough Eddie Murphy in
Right.
this classic Eddie Murphy movie. You know what I mean? So but I wanted to mention Wesley Snipes because he was amazing in it, and he's not known as much for comedy other than stuff like White Men Can't Jump and things like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, he was really a standout. And also, I want to give a special mention to Shari Headley because Shari Headley has not been in many movies since her debut in the original Coming to
Right.
America. And so you would think, after all these years, maybe she was rusty and wouldn't wouldn't have been in practice enough to really hold her own. But she did a really good job as well. And so I was
Yeah.
surprised that she held up so well.
I liked her
Honestly.
relationship with Leslie Jones's character. I thought that was a good part of the film. I enjoyed Leslie Jones. She was playing Leslie Jones, but she's funny. She's always funny. And Tracy Morgan is always good for
Tracy,
a
yeah,
laugh. He's
yeah.
so
Tracy
funny.
Morgan is always a highlight too. Yeah, he was very
Yeah.
funny in his part as well. I won't say the same for Leslie Jones because my take on Leslie. She does play the same thing all the time, so
Right.
it kind of it kind of gets annoying to
I thought
see
it
it
worked in
all the
this
time.
situation. I thought she played it right, and I liked the relationship between her and Shari Headley's character. I thought, and I liked how they started out as kind of more of a rival, um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then came together at the end, and
Right.
I thought that was kind of enjoyable. I also want to one of the cameos I thought were good too. The cameos
Hmm.
were um, James Earl Jones in his role. You know, he's what is he now? He's like 90s something, like 90.
Is he?
He's
Wow.
yeah, he's still like,
Wow.
but he was great. And then
Hmm.
the Morgan Freeman cameo was just pretty
Yeah,
hysterical. I
that
really
was
like
very
that
funny.
the whole thing about them. The, there's a scene at the beginning. I'm not really going into spoiler territory here because it's pretty early in the film, but well, James Earl Jones' character wants to have a funeral for himself before he dies. So
Yes.
they play
Yes.
it up with this pomp and circumstance, and they invite all these special celebrities to perform
Yes.
at his funeral, and it's pretty that's pretty funny.
No,
I thought
definitely.
that was pretty funny.
No, and those are certainly really fun cameos. You mentioned Morgan Freeman. I won't mention the others, but it's certainly a fun segue, segment
Hmm.
for it. Um, I wanted to also mention one of the standouts for me, and this is sort of less a comedy standout, but more of one person that really brought some good gravity to the story was John Amos as
Hmm.
Mr. McDowell, Cleo McDowell, who
Right.
from in the first movie, everyone remembers he actually owned McDowell's, which was sort of a McDonald's knockoff in the neighborhood of Queens. And he still has his restaurant, but it's in Zamunda now. And he sort of, after Eddie Murphy, you know, his character Prince Akeem or King Akeem at the time of this part of the film needs a little bit of fatherly advice, and he's got this surrogate father and his
Yeah.
father-in-law, and that was a really, really good scene. One of the better scenes actually in the film.
Right. The McDowell stuff was funny. I thought like the when they introduced it at the beginning and they were eating the new meatless burger
Right,
and
right,
stuff like that. That was pretty funny. One of
definitely.
the if we're talking about stuff that was really well done in this film was I have to shout out to the costumer. The costumes in this were terrific.
Hmm.
Like they were amazing. Like they need to
Yes.
be considered for some sort
Well,
of
well,
award for what they've done.
Ruth Carter actually won the Academy Award for her costume design of Black Panther. So
Right.
she's obviously a fantastic costume designer, and again, does like you said, does a great job with all the costumes for sure.
Yeah,
But
that was
Ruth Carter,
terrific.
and I should have mentioned her, when we were talking about some of the other cast and crew. But
I
yeah,
mean,
Ruth
when
Carter
somebody
was
like
tremendous.
me notices the costume design, they've done a good job, because I am not, I'm not one of those people that looks, oh, this costume's so good, or this outfit's so put
Right.
together so well. But it was really, I was really impressed with what they came up with.
Definitely, definitely, and it's Academy Award winner Ruth
All
Carter
right,
who did the
all right.
costume. So yeah, but I think you're right about that. And let's kind of talk a little bit about, I'm saving myself from not being negative, but let's talk about sort of in general. Um, I'm just saying I don't think it's that good a film. That's I'll say that right off the bat here. I thought there was some good stuff in it, like we talked about some of it,
Right.
but I think it brings up, sort of the elephant in the room. No offense, Babar, but of sequels
Right.
and do sequels work? And is the answer that normally no?
Well, it depends on the sequel. It depends on if the sequel develops organically
Mhm.
for a film, or if it's something that's trying to recapture the magic of the first film. Um, and I think that in this case, it's so far removed from the original film that
Right.
that it's obviously more of a ploy to try to recapture that magic, and feed off the nostalgia of the first film. Whereas, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, or a movie like
Sure. Sure.
that,
Sure.
are
Sure.
they're made up to be
I think they're meant to
serialized.
be,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
right.
I think that's a good point. Is that there's some series that are made to be series, right, and some that were never intended to, but then get slapped into sequel territory, right?
Right.
And
Right.
another example, like I'll say this about, and this is, I think you're right. There's a lot to say about, because one of the other things I was going to say is like the translation over 3 decades. How can you get back to that same kind of magic? It's really difficult. But
Right.
like for instance, I'll compare this to um, Pirates of the Caribbean. Right, the original Pirates of the Caribbean is a movie that really seemed uninspired on paper. I mean, you got a Disney ride and you're going to make a movie out of it. It turned out to be incredibly inspired,
Right.
and then the sequels, at least at first, uh, did were worked well enough. You know what I mean, to
Hmm.
continue the line. But I think it's also because they were done closer together than this one and its
Right.
predecessor. I mean, 33 years, right?
Well, and there's a natural a storyline that's in some of
Right,
these action type movies or sci-fi type movies that you don't. I mean, Coming to America wrapped up in the spot where the story was told. Now you're
right,
trying to tell a different story, but you're trying to bring back elements that made the original, people like the original. So yeah, the callback to
right.
McDowell's is funny, stuff like that. But you can't. I don't think you can successfully build a full feature off of that, right? I compare it
Mhm,
a little bit to Clerks and Clerks 2.
mhm.
And Clerks 2 is definitely the inferior film. Um,
Sure.
but I did appreciate kind of the way Kevin Smith tried to tell the story of these characters at a different age and how they've changed, or not
Yes.
changed in this case. And I believe he's going back to the well for Clerks 3 to see them even at a later date. I kind of enjoyed that peeking
Right.
in on people as they've changed. I think you look at the Before Sunset series, or Before Sunrise, all that stuff. That's another good example of like
Mhm, mhm.
peeking in on these characters after they've changed. We talked about this a bit when we talked about
Right.
our election. Like, wouldn't it be cool
Mhm.
to check out Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick's characters now, almost
Absolutely.
30 years later, to see what they're doing? I mean, and
Right.
telling a different story. I think that's where this movie fails, and where a lot of sequels fail, is they try to tell the same story again without, like,
Yeah.
could you tell a different story? Because this is really the same story, just told. Eddie Murphy's no longer the main
Reverse,
character.
almost. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, yeah, it's a kid from America coming to
Right.
Zamunda. But honestly, the way they built Zamunda up to be the whole first act is they are very Americanized now. So there's no culture shock when he comes to Zamunda,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So they
Hmm.
I think that's where they kind of failed. Like they could have
Yes.
really had this guy come into a not as an Americanized, like if it was told from the point of view of like if this was General Izzy, Wesley Snipes character, bringing him to Zamunda to try to, you know what I mean? Like, I think that would
Right.
have been a
Right.
better story because he's living in the traditional world of like Idi Amin and all, like those types of
Right. Right.
dictators, and that would have been a completely different environment to throw somebody into. So,
Right. No, no. Yeah, I think you're right. And that's, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, both on our list of what made this inferior is that there's really no fish out of water. I mean, because there's no water. When the character comes to Zamunda, he's in one house pretty
right,
much the whole time. I mean,
right. That's the other
where's
thing.
the water?
Yeah,
There's absolutely no water for the fish to be out of, you know what I mean?
right. And I would say,
Um,
yeah, I would also say that's kind of a flaw of the film too. Is that for a movie, a big budget movie, it really did feel kind of low budget at that point because they really just stuck to this palace. There was really
right.
no wide open scenes. Uh, I
And
understand they filmed it at Rick Ross's mansion in Atlanta,
yeah, yeah,
but
formerly Evander Holyfield's place, which
yeah,
I know is huge. I've actually driven by when it was Evander's still, but yeah, which is impressive that they were able to do that. But again, when Eddie Murphy in the first film comes to America, he's all over Queens, and he's exploring this gigantic city. You know what I mean? And yet, when this kid comes from Queens to Zamunda, you got this nice palace, and that's it. You
yeah.
know what I mean? And he's in
And,
the palace.
and as a Atlanta resident, it was disappointing to me because I didn't get to see like, oh, that's that Atlanta location or that.
Right.
I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah,
not. It was
definitely.
standing in for Queens. There was a couple points, but
Right. Right.
you didn't. Yeah, like you said, you didn't really feel the environment as you did in the
Right.
original.
True, true. And then one other thing, we did talk a little bit about translating the comedy over decades, and um, I just don't know that they were able to sort of capture the spirit of the original versus now. And again, you right now maybe it's hard to judge that because this film did get delayed, and so a lot
Right.
has changed since they made this movie. You
Right.
know.
Um. Well, another thing I would say about that is the original was rated R, and this
Yes.
one is rated PG-13, and I think
Yes.
to try to capture that wider audience, they might have held back a little bit from. I
Hmm.
mean, the first one wasn't like raunchy
No.
in any real
No.
way, but and the way the ratings have kind of changed over the years, so it might have been rated. Well, it had some nudity in it, so it probably would not have been rated PG-13 nowadays. But
Right.
um, it did. I just felt like they were trying to play it too safe and try to appeal to a mass audience, and therefore
I I
they
think yeah,
lost
I
some.
think you're right. I think you're right because when Coming to America came out, Eddie Murphy was still, delirious and raw and
Yeah,
certainly raunchy. You know what I mean? He was
right,
known to be raunchy, right? And he did rated R comedies. Trading Places is rated R.
right.
48 Hours is rated
I
R.
think
You know
Beverly
what I
Hills
mean? And
Cops is rated R too, isn't it?
Beverly Hills exactly. And
Right,
then so Coming to America was actually tame by those
right,
standards. You know
right.
what I mean? And yet, and of course, his character was so endearing, and his innocence really carries that film. You know what I mean? This innocent belief in love, right? Carries that whole film. And so this one, that's kind of all out absent, even though they've tried to tame the rating. You know what I mean? They tried to tame the
Right.
material to a broader rating, which I don't think worked, like you said.
And also, I mean, one of the things that works against this film is, like you said, he did have the innocence quality to him
Hmm.
in the first film, and he doesn't have that in this one. He's white, he's older and wiser, so he's not that. I'm quoting Britney Spears here. He's not that innocent, but
Right.
uh, but yeah, I mean, so therefore the conflict is kind of devalued there, and especially because the
Yeah.
the kid that he brings is also not naive
Right. Right.
either, and
And
there's not
and
there's not enough that it happens
yeah,
for him to be naive,
right,
right?
exactly. Exactly. He doesn't really have any obstacles. It's just whether he's going to go through with becoming a member of the family or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's it, and that's like his choice basically. And then the other thing, what you mentioned about about conflict. In the original, there was a lot more conflict with outside forces. Like, for instance, Lisa, the love interest of Akeem, had a boyfriend at the time.
Hmm.
And so this was sort of, that was one of the things that was really missing. And people, one of the things that I would have liked in fan service was to see what happened to Daryl, Eric LaSalle's character from the first film,
Right.
because, and her sister for that matter. But, that didn't come forward. And that element of this rival, was not in this, other than, the Wesley Snipes, I guess, was supposed to be a rival, but
Yeah,
it
but
didn't really work that way.
yeah, it wasn't played that way. I think he could have been. They could have amped him up a little bit. Not him as the character, but amped up his role a little bit more,
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
he could have provided that
Yes.
conflict that we didn't get.
But then again, he was in conflict with Eddie Murphy, whereas more,
Right.
like you mentioned, more of the story was
Eddie
around
Murphy's not
Eddie
the main
Murphy's
character,
son.
right? He's
Exactly.
not the
So
main character in this movie, in my opinion.
no, I think you're
Um,
right. I think you're right, and that's sort of what fails it. But let's talk a little bit about fan service, because one of the things that this reminded me of, but at the same time I let it go there, so I'm kind of feeling guilty because I let it go there. Uh, Remember, the first in the series of the new Star Wars, right?
right.
Phantom Menace, right? A lot of Phantom Menace is fan service, and
Phantom
they
Menace or
basically try to.
Force Awakens?
I'm sorry, Force Awakens.
Okay, because
Sorry,
Phantom Menace is
no, I'm blanking. No, my bad. The Force Awakens. So a lot of the Force Awakens is a retelling of Episode 4, right? A New
right,
Hope.
right.
It's,
Yeah,
it's completely right. That's what I think they tried to do with this. It just did not work the same. And is it because I like Star Wars so much more, or is it because they just didn't do it well enough, the fan service part?
I think they didn't do it well enough, and I also think that the idea of flipping the story and having a protagonist that's not is able enough to carry the film failed it. Whereas in
Yeah,
Force Awakens, Daisy Ridley's character was very was a good character, and was
right, right.
and there was just enough changes to make you question some of the things that were going on.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I just wanted to like bounce that off you, just because like I was like I liked Force Awakens so much, and yet they're trying to do the exact same thing here. And I
I don't
like Coming to America so much. It's just did not work here.
I don't think fan service is necessarily a bad thing ever. It's whether you do it right or not, right?
No.
So
I
Marvel
grant you that. Yeah.
is the number one key to doing fan service. They know fan service left and right. So
Right.
I mean, and they do it right. Um, so it's just like, yeah, it's like I think you can tell. It's not something you can like really put a finger on, but I think you can tell fan service when it's just in there for the wink and the nod and not relevant to the story. I think you
Right.
have to have service that actually is relevant to the story that you're trying to tell.
I think you're right, but at the same time, if not for fan service, this film would have been even
Oh yeah,
worse.
I agree.
You know what I'm saying? Because
I want to say one other
I
thing
was
about this film, though,
okay.
and it kind of relates to fan service, and it's not really fan service, but it's um, trying to maximize your audience. I believe, like
Mhm.
trying to appeal to multiple demographics. I think they tried to make an appeal to women and have female characters be strong and empowered, and all of his daughters were very, strong,
Right.
powerful women. Um,
Hmm.
but they do a disservice because they're not integral to the story at all. In fact,
Right.
they disappear for the second half of the movie, and you're like, oh yeah, he's got daughters too, right? I mean,
Right. Right.
this guy out of nowhere comes and to try to save his country, but there was a little bit of the conflict where his daughter wanted to take
Hmm.
over for him, but the rules say it had to be a male heir, and that could have been a real big conflict in this film. But it was kind of like, oh well, that's the rules,
Right.
and
Right.
then they try to come up with the tweak at the end where like, oh yeah, she took over, right?
Right.
Like, I guess spoiler alert, but whatever. Um, it's just
She gets your moment
trying,
to shine. Let's just say, yeah.
yeah. It's just that came off as fake to me. That came off as real
Right.
fake to me.
Right.
Like,
No,
if you're
no.
going to have these strong, powerful women that are empowered, have them be consequential to the plot, because that's just as bad as not having them in there to begin with, if you ask me.
No. I agree. I agree with you for sure. They wanted their cake, try to eat it too, and it
Right.
just didn't work out. They didn't bake the cake well enough.
The cake was
But
moist inside. Too
yeah,
moist.
yeah. But
I'm saying the word
you know,
moist because a lot of people hate the word moist, and I'm going to say moist a whole bunch and piss off all
why
of
do
them.
people hate moist?
I don't know.
Moist is good. But anyway, like I said, I was let down quite a bit.
Right.
That said, I did laugh a good amount, and there are some high points in the film. And because it's on streaming, and if you have actually Amazon Prime, it's free to you, so you didn't have to pay, to see it. It's certainly worth seeing.
All right. So, yeah, we have to wrap up. So, what's your final grade?
I'm gonna give it a C plus,
Hmm.
but it's barely a plus.
Well, it's kind of funny because I'm going to give it a C plus as well, but I think we have differing values of our C pluses because I think I liked it more than you did. But
Maybe that's the case. So maybe it's just a C for me then. But I give it a plus because the second viewing I did laugh a little more than the first, and it's mainly because of some of the again fan service. And you know, uh, uh, like I said, if they did not have fan service, they wouldn't have anything in
right,
this film. So when I watched it the second time, I did allow myself to enjoy it more. So I laughed quite a few times. And again, Wesley Snipes, awesome in this film.
right,
I like Paul Bates too coming back. His unique character was really cool to see him again. So again, that's why I I push it maybe toward a plus, but you're probably right. It's if you're going C plus, then I have to say C because I'm sure I did not like it. Uh, you liked it a little more than me.
right. Well, we have to wrap up, but I did want to put one thought about this: is how much does this go to expectations versus reality? Because I think I also saw this in WandaVision as well. Not to go into any spoilers on that, but
Hmm. Hmm.
with WandaVision, the case was people had all these theories and all this stuff, and some of those theories may or may not have been true, and therefore they were disappointed that their theories weren't true. So I'm wondering if it's the same
Hmm.
thing about Coming to America. Maybe you had high expectations because you did love the original so much that and that might be why you liked it more the second time, because now your expectations are what they are.
I think you're probably right, but I tried to temper them because I knew it was no way it was going to be as good as the original. And
Right,
then when I happened to see, it's so funny. I watched it on a Friday night, and then I rewatched it on uh, later in the week. But on that Saturday, they happened to be playing the television version of Coming to America, and I happened to be sitting around and watching it, and just remembering how amazing the first one is again
right,
for the 50th time or whatever. And that brought me down. But then, like you said, since I was sort of down on it when I let go of all that and then watched it again, it was not bad. You know what I mean? It was
right,
not
right.
as bad as I originally thought. So you're probably right.
All right. Well, let us know what you thought about Coming to America. You can, contact us in a multitude of ways that we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Once again, we want to thank Eureka Failure for providing the music for this podcast. And also want to remind you, Movie Madness is around on Instagram. Uh, and
Definitely.
then what else, Martin?
Well, definitely share and rate and subscribe and do all that good stuff. Let's get a push. Let's get a push and put more ratings out and more subscription out there. We'd love to get grow this podcast a little bit. I
Right.
do want to say one thing. My regular sort of sign off. I just want to say I read a quote today from somebody who's probably problematic, Henry Ford, but his quote was something I kind of identify with. He said, "Thinking is the hardest work you can do. That's why most people don't do it." And I'm paraphrasing it. And I'm like, that is so true. And I know there's a temptation not to think, and especially in our new world where it's so media sort of saturated, we let everyone else think for us. And I think that's just unacceptable. We need to start grabbing the reins and thinking for ourselves. So let's do more of that, folks.
Yeah. So Martin, how do you think I should wrap up this podcast? I don't really want to put much thought into it.
I think you should just say, see you next time.
All right. See you next time.